The cattle should have been starving. That was the thought that woke Silas Hardin at 3 in the morning on a bitter March night in 1889, sitting straight up in his cold bed with the certainty of it heavy in his chest. He had been feeding them thin for 6 weeks. He knew what thin cattle looked like coming out of a Wyoming winter. His steers looked fat. His heifers looked strong. And he had not been putting enough hay in the north pasture to explain a single pound of it. He pulled on his boots without lighting the lamp. His wife had died in that bed 4 winters back, and he had never learned to light a lamp without expecting her hand to be there guiding the match. Easier now to move in the dark. Silas took the Winchester down from above the door because a man does not walk out into a Wyoming night without one, and he stepped into air so cold it burned the inside of his nose. The moon was near full. The snow between the house and the barn held the blue color that snow only holds under a moon like that, and beyond the barn the north pasture stretched toward the mountains like a page somebody had not yet written on. Somebody had written on it. There were tracks. Small tracks. Too small for a grown man. Too regular for a coyote. They came down from the ridge behind the hay shed, crossed to the feed sled, and went from the sled out to the cattle in a straight, patient line, and then back again. He counted 7 trips. 7 trips in one night. He followed them. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Pour something warm, pull the blanket a little closer, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to know who's sitting with us by this fire. The tracks led him 300 yards out to where the herd had bedded down against the windbreak of cottonwoods, and there in the moonlight, he saw the boy. He was not more than 9. He was standing between 2 of Silas's biggest steers, and he had one arm looped over the neck of the nearest one like the animal was his brother. He was pulling loose hay from a bundle almost as big as he was and pushing it toward their mouths one handful at a time. He was not wearing a coat. He was wearing what Silas realized, with a slow, terrible turn of the stomach, was a flour sack cut with holes for the arms and the head. His feet were wrapped in rags. Silas lowered the rifle. He stood there in the snow for a long minute and watched a child no bigger than a fence post feed a 2,000-pound animal in the middle of the night, and he understood without needing to be told that this had been happening for a while. The path in the snow was packed too hard to be new. The cattle did not startle when the boy touched them. They knew him. Silas took one step forward, and the snow crunched, and the boy went still. He did not run. He did not cry out. He turned his head slowly, the way a rabbit turns when it has already decided the hawk is too close, and running will only make the ending faster. And he looked up at Silas with eyes that had already been beaten past fear and out the other side into something like patience. "I'll go," the boy said. His voice was smaller than his tracks. "Where?" Silas said. The boy did not answer that. He just kept looking up. Silas realized his own hands were shaking, and it was not the cold. It was the sudden and terrible arithmetic of what he was looking at. A child, alone, in the dark, in a flour sack, feeding another man's cattle. For how long? From where? Whose child? Whose son that nobody was out looking for at 3 in the morning on a night this cold? "Come inside," Silas said. "I ain't a thief," the boy said. "I never took nothing but what I put back." "I know it," Silas said, and he was surprised to find that he did know it. "Come inside. Before your feet come off." The boy looked at the steer he had his arm around like he was asking its opinion. Then he stepped away from the animal, and the animal made a low sound in its throat that Silas had never heard one of his own cattle make before, and the boy walked past Silas toward the house, without looking back. His name was Wren. That was all he would say the first night. Not Wren anything. Just Wren. Silas built the fire up until the room smelled of pine smoke and the boy stopped shivering. He put a kettle on. He found an old shirt of his own that came down past the boy's knees, and while the boy changed behind a chair with the dignity of a much older person, Silas cut the rags off his feet with a knife and found what he expected and did not want to find. Frostbite in 2 toes. Sores in 3 places. Feet that had walked farther than any 9-year-old's feet should walk in a lifetime. He warmed water. He cleaned the feet. The boy did not make a sound. "How long?" Silas said finally. "Since the leaves come off," Wren said. Silas counted backward in his head. October. It was March. 5 months. A child had been living somewhere within walking distance of his cattle for 5 months, feeding them at night, and Silas Hardin, who prided himself on knowing every inch of his own land, had not seen a sign of him until tonight. "Where do you sleep?" he said. The boy studied the fire. "Wren. In the old line shack," the boy said. Up by the seep. I put stones over the holes in the roof. It ain't so bad. Silas knew the line shack. It was 3 miles from the house. It had not been used since his father's time. It had no stove. It had a dirt floor and one broken window, and it was, this week, sitting in about 11 inches of snow. And you were feeding my cattle, Silas said. Because you weren't giving them enough, the boy said, and there was no accusation in it, only fact. I could see from the ridge. The little one with the white face was going to die first. She's the one that likes apples. So I moved hay from the shed at night. I only took what they needed. I put the rest back neat so you wouldn't notice. Silas looked at him for a long time. You walked 3 miles both ways, he said. In that, he pointed at the flour sack drying by the fire. The cattle was cold too, Wren said. That was the first quotable thing the boy ever said to him, and Silas did not know yet that he would carry it the rest of his life. He only knew, sitting there in a kitchen that had been empty of any voice but his own for 4 winters, that a piece of ice he had not known was still inside him had cracked. He made the boy a bed on the floor by the stove. The boy fell asleep before the second blanket settled on him. Silas sat at the table with his coffee and watched him breathe. By morning he had made a decision. He rode into Cold Spring at first light, and by 10 o'clock he was standing in front of the sheriff's desk saying words he had not planned to say. There's a boy at my place, he said. About 9. Calls himself Wren. Been living rough since fall. I mean to keep him until we find who lost him, or until we know he wasn't lost so much as thrown. Sheriff Boone Coulter was a fair man on his good days and a tired man on all of them. He looked up from his paperwork and studied Silas for a longer time than the news called for. Hardin, he said carefully. There's a man named Ellery Vane took over the 2 Rivers spread last summer. Big money out of Denver. He's been asking after a runaway. Says the boy stole from him. What did he say the boy stole? A pair of boots, Boone said. And a coat. Silas thought of the flour sack. He thought of the rags. He thought of the frostbite eating quietly at 2 small toes in his kitchen while a fire he had built kept the rest of the child from following. The boy is not wearing a coat, Sheriff, he said. And he is not wearing boots. Boone Coulter set his pen down. Ellery Vane, he said, is a bad man to cross, Silas. He has bought half this valley in 8 months. He has the judge and Laramie in his pocket, and he has the 2 Pinkertons who came in on last week's train drinking at the hotel on his account. If that boy is his, legally or otherwise, and you keep him, Vane will come for both of you. Then he will come, Silas said. He rode home the long way, past the 2 Rivers boundary, and he saw for himself the fence line freshly strung across what had been open range for 30 years. He saw the new bunkhouse. He saw the 4 men on horseback watching him from a low rise, unmoving, the way men watch who have been paid to watch. At the house, Wren was awake. Silas had left him a plate of biscuits and bacon and a note that said eat, which the boy could not read, but had understood anyway. The plate was empty. The boy was standing at the window looking out at the cattle in the north pasture with an expression Silas did not entirely understand yet, but would come to know as the look of a child who had made peace with being taken from every good thing before it ever really belonged to him. Silas hung his hat and said, That man Vane. You know him? Wren nodded once. You worked for him. Wren nodded again. Then, because Silas had earned it by not asking with anger, the boy said, My mama worked in his kitchen. She died in October. He said I owed him her wages back. He said I'd work them off. He put me in the barn to sleep, and he took the shoes off my feet so I wouldn't run. And you ran anyway, Silas said. I ran barefoot, the boy said. He didn't reckon on that. That sat between them for a while. Wren, Silas said. What would you have me do? The boy turned from the window. He was very serious. He looked exactly like a man of 60 who had somehow been made small. I don't want to go back, he said. But I don't want you to get hurt on account of me either. I've been the reason for enough hurt already. Silas Hardin, who had buried a wife and 2 babies who never took their first breath and a father who had built this ranch with his own hands, looked at that boy and thought about what a man is for. What the whole business of a man's life amounts to, when it is set down honestly and the ledger is closed. He thought this. This is what it is for. If you're feeling this story tonight, I want to ask you something honestly. What would you have done standing in that kitchen? Would you have taken the boy back? Would you have hidden him? Would you have ridden out to meet Ellery Vane on his own porch? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. 3 days later the riders came. Silas had been expecting them. He had spent those 3 days doing two things. The first was teaching Wren to load a rifle without cocking it, which is a thing a boy that age should not have to learn, but which the world had decided he would learn anyway. The second was writing letters. One to a lawyer in Cheyenne named Meredith Poole who had done right by Silas's father in a land dispute 40 years back. One to a woman in Denver whose name Silas had not spoken since his wife's funeral, because she was his wife's sister, and she was a schoolteacher, and she was the only person in the world he trusted with a child. He mailed both letters through a freight driver who owed him a favor and would not stop at the Two Rivers Gate. The riders came at dusk. 4 of them. Ellery Vane rode at the front on a black gelding that cost more than Silas's whole herd, and his face was the smooth, patient face of a man who has never in his life been told no by anyone poorer than himself. Behind him rode the 2 Pinkertons and a foreman with a scar from ear to collar. Silas met them at the porch. He did not raise the rifle. He held it across his forearm like a man holds a piece of firewood he has not decided where to put yet. "Mr. Hardin," Vane said. His voice was warm. "That was the worst thing about it. I believe you have something of mine." "I have a boy," Silas said. "He is not yours. He is bonded to me for his mother's debts," Vane said. "I have the paper in my saddlebag. I can show it to you, or I can show it to the sheriff. Your preference." "Show it to the sheriff," Silas said. "He is riding out here now. I sent for him this morning." That was a lie. He had not sent for Boone Coulter. But he had seen, half an hour before the riders arrived, the dust of a single horse on the north road, and he was betting his life and the boys on who was raising it. Vane's smile did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "You are making an expensive mistake, Mr. Hardin." "I have made cheaper ones," Silas said. The foreman with the scar moved his hand toward his hip. The rifle came off Silas's forearm and into his shoulder in one motion that surprised even him, and the foreman's hand went still. "Mr. Vane," Silas said quietly, "that boy has been feeding my cattle in the dark for 5 months because you were letting him freeze. He walked 3 miles each way in a flour sack to keep animals alive that did not belong to him. If you think I am going to hand him back to you over a pair of boots you claim he stole, you have made an error of judgment that I do not intend to explain twice." The dust on the north road was closer now. It resolved into a horse. Onto the horse resolved Boone Coulter, and behind Boone, riding hard, was a woman Silas had not seen in 4 years. Ruth Ellender, his wife's sister. She had gotten his letter one day sooner than he had dared to hope, and she had gotten on the first train, and she had ridden the last 12 miles from the depot on a horse she had rented at the livery, and she arrived in the yard with her hair coming loose from its pins and her eyes bright, with the particular fury of a woman who has been told a child was hurt. She did not look at Silas. She looked at Ellery Vane. "Mr. Vane," she said, and her voice was the voice of a schoolteacher who has been teaching for 20 years and has met his kind before in smaller sizes. "I have in my bag a letter from Judge Amos Warwick of the Denver District Court, dated 2 days ago, granting temporary guardianship of the minor known as Wren to Silas Hardin and Ruth Ellender jointly, pending investigation of the child's treatment on your property. I also have in my bag statements from 2 women who worked in your kitchen and left after what they saw. If you would like the sheriff to look at them now, he is right here." Boone Coulter, God bless him, dismounted slowly and put his hand on the butt of his own rifle in a manner that was not quite pointing, but was not quite not. Ellery Vane looked at the woman. He looked at the sheriff. He looked at the rifle in Silas Hardin's shoulder. He looked at the 4 cattle grazing peaceably behind the barn who had been kept alive by a barefoot boy while their own owner slept. "This is not finished," he said. "It is finished tonight," Silas said. The riders turned. They rode out slow, because men like that never gallop away, but they rode. Ruth Ellender came up the porch steps, and Silas realized his hands were shaking again, and this time it was not the cold and not the arithmetic. It was that she was standing in front of him, and she had come. She said, "Where is he?" Silas opened the door. Wren was sitting at the table with the unloaded rifle across his knees, exactly where Silas had told him to stay. He looked up at the woman in the doorway, and Ruth Ellender, who had buried her own son of measles at 4 years old 15 years before and had not held a child since, went to her knees in front of him without a word and opened her arms. He did not go into them right away. He looked at her a long moment, and then he looked at Silas, and Silas nodded once, and Wren set the rifle carefully on the table and walked into the arms of a stranger who was not a stranger at all, because grief recognizes grief, and love recognizes love, even in the dark. They stayed like that a long time. Later, when the boy was asleep in Silas's own bed under 3 quilts and the fire was low, Silas and Ruth sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee neither of them was drinking. "You wrote," she said. "I wrote. It took you 4 years. It took me a boy in a flour sack," he said. "I am sorry it took that." She looked at him. Her eyes were her sister's eyes, and they were also her own, and Silas had spent 4 years being afraid of both. "Silas," she said, "I did not come because you wrote. I came because a child was cold. Do not confuse the two." "I would not," he said. "But," she said, and she set her cup down, "I am glad you wrote. If this story is moving you tonight, then you are exactly who I wrote it for. A quiet like, a quiet subscribe. It tells me you want more stories about the ones the world tried to forget. That's all I need to keep going." She stayed. Not that night, because she slept in the front room out of propriety, and not the next week, because there was a hearing in Laramie she had to be present for. But she stayed in the way that mattered. She wrote to Silas from Denver twice a week, and she came out on the train once a month, and by summer, she was teaching Wren his letters at the kitchen table, while Silas mended tack in the yard and pretended not to listen through the open window, as the boy learned to read the word home by sounding it out one careful letter at a time. The hearing went as hearings go when a lawyer named Meredith Poole is properly paid and properly angry. The bond of servitude Ellery Vane produced turned out to be signed by a woman who had been dead of typhus 3 weeks before the date on the paper. The statements from the 2 former kitchen women turned out to be only the beginning. By the end of the summer, a federal marshal out of Cheyenne had opened a formal investigation into Vane's dealings, and by the end of the autumn, 3 of the ranches Vane had bought were found to have been transferred under signatures that did not match any living hand. Ellery Vane lost the 2 Rivers spread in November. He lost his standing in Denver by Christmas. He lost his freedom the following spring, when a jury of 12 men who had themselves been cheated by richer men found him guilty on 11 counts and sent him to the territorial prison for a term that would outlast him. Everything he had built on other people's ruin was auctioned off in pieces, and the pieces went cheap, and among the pieces was the 2 Rivers North Range, which bordered Silas Hardin's north pasture. Silas bought it for a song. He bought it in Wren's name. The paper sat in the drawer of the kitchen table for a year before Silas told the boy what was in it. When he did tell him, on the morning of Wren's 10th birthday, the boy read the paper slowly, sounding out the long words, and then he looked up at Silas with a face that was still trying to decide whether the world was allowed to be this kind. "It's mine," he said. "It's yours," Silas said. "You earned every acre of it in the dark when nobody was looking." Wren considered this. Then he said, very quietly, "The cattle knew." Silas had to turn away for a minute to get his face right. Ruth married him the following June, in the yard, under the cottonwoods where Wren had first stood between 2 steers in a flour sack. She wore a dress the color of new wheat. Wren stood between them, one hand in each of theirs, and when the preacher asked who gave this woman, Wren said, before anyone could stop him, "I do." And nobody corrected him, because in every way that a 9-year-old boy who had walked through 5 months of Wyoming winter to keep animals alive could give anyone away, he was giving her. 3 years later, a traveler passing through Cold Spring in late autumn stopped at the general store and asked the old storekeeper, the one with the tic of wiping the same spot on the counter over and over, whether the story he had heard down in Denver was true. About the rancher and the schoolteacher and the boy who fed cattle in the dark. The storekeeper wiped his spot. He looked out the window at the road. "The boy is 12 now," he said. "He rides out every night before supper with a lantern and walks the north pasture. Won't be talked out of it. His mama, that's what he calls her, his mama. She packs him a biscuit for the ride. He gives half of it to the little heifer with the white face. Been doing it 3 years. Every night," the traveler said. "Every night," the storekeeper said. "I asked him once why he still does it, now that he don't have to." "What did he say?" The storekeeper stopped wiping. He looked at the traveler for the first time. He said, "The cattle was cold once. They remember. It ain't a hard thing to remember them back." The traveler rode out that same afternoon toward the mountains, and if he looked back at just the right hour, as the light went blue over the Wyoming snow and the first star came out above the cottonwoods, he would have seen a small figure with a lantern moving in a slow, patient line from a warm house out to a herd of cattle that lifted their heads in recognition as he came, and behind him, in the lit window of the kitchen, a man and a woman standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the boy they had been given walk out into the dark and come safely, always safely, home. Next time, we'll tell you the story of a widowed midwife who was sent to deliver a baby at the richest ranch in Montana and discovered, in the middle of a blizzard, that the mother had been locked in that room for 9 months by a husband who never intended either of them to leave it alive. Stay warm tonight. Stay close to the ones who remember you. We'll see you by the fire again soon.